Hello, you're watching Scotland at 7 with me, Hugh Stewart, and it's Thursday the 19th of May. So after running through the latest from Ukraine, I'm going to be joined by Anne McLaughlin, Member of Parliament. Good evening, Anne. So
Evening, Hugh. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's good to see you again. So I'll quickly run
And
over
you?
the latest as Russia's war in Ukraine takes us today to day 85, and we hear that the Russian Defense Ministry has said that 1,730 fighters at the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol have surrendered since Monday. That's with 771 surrendering in the last 24 hours and 80 wounded. The ministry said those in need of inpatient treatment will receive assistance in medical institutions, Rosa Nova, Azov and Donetsk. The International Committee of the Red Cross, that's the ICRC, has said they have started to register combatants leaving the Azovstal plant, including the wounded, at the request of the parties. Registration involves the individual filling out a form with personal details like name, date of birth and closest relative. This information allows the RCRC to track those who have been captured and to help them keep in touch with their families. The UK Ministry of Defence has claimed that Russia's Lieutenant General Sergei Hisel has been suspended for failing to capture Kharkiv, and Vice Admiral Igor Osipov has been suspended from commanding the Black Sea Fleet. The trial of the 21-year-old Vadim Shishimarin has continued today in Kyiv. The Russian tank commander has pleaded guilty to the murder of a 62-year-old civilian who was riding his bicycle on a village road. Finland's Prime Minister Sanna Marin has said in an interview with an Italian newspaper that she does not anticipate NATO opening a permanent base nor placing nuclear weapons on Finnish soil. This issue is not on the agenda, she told the Corriere della Sera. Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki has said that his country will defend Sweden and Finland if they're attacked before they join NATO. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi has called for an urgent ceasefire in Ukraine so that serious negotiations can begin to end the war. Signor Draghi said it was important to maintain pressure on Russia through economic sanctions to bring Moscow to the negotiating table. We'll discuss sanctions in a couple of minutes. And next we hear that today G7 finance ministers are meeting in Germany today, so they have been, possibly still meeting right now, and they intend to thrash out a plan to bolster Ukraine's war-ravaged economy. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said before the meeting, which is in Königswinter, that what had been agreed so far was not enough and has called upon other countries to join us in increasing this financial support. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that food shortages stoked by the war in Ukraine could cause malnutrition, mass hunger and famine in a crisis which could last for years around the world. Russia's Aeroflot, Ural Airlines and Rossiya Airlines have all been targeted with new sanctions to prevent them selling off landing slots at UK airports. The US Embassy in Kyiv has reopened after closing nearly 3 months ago at the beginning of the war. Staff ran the Star-Spangled Banner up the flagpole outside the embassy at Assembly on Thursday, that's this morning. Switzerland's Department of Foreign Affairs has announced that it will reopen its embassy in Kyiv. Okay, Anne, we're going to look again now at a bit more detail in a minute on the food crisis which has been provoked by the Russia's war in Ukraine. First of all, any other comments on the news that's just come in today before we move on?
Which particular news?
On the Ukraine points. I was going to particularly focus on the food crisis and on the business of sanctions because it looks like Putin is again, he's retaliating by using sanctions against the West, isn't he? By saying you can pay for higher oil prices if you want to. So he's saying sanctions go both ways, and it's beginning to use food as a sanction as well.
I mean, it's a lesson for us, isn't it, about being more self-sufficient, because there already was a crisis looming in terms of food provision, and that's before you even start looking at people's incomes and their ability to purchase food. It's about the availability of it. But there already was a crisis looming, and now because of this war, and because we are so dependent on Russia for some things, Ukraine for other things, you know, it's really, really difficult. And, you know, I say it's really, really difficult. I sit here in the comfort of my, you know, well-paid job and, you know, all the rest of it. It's going to be cataclysmic, I think was the word that the governor of the Bank of England used. And I suppose the lesson is that we all need to, and I think there is, you know, a desire to do this as we go forward, is try to become more self-sufficient in each of our countries, never to get into the position where you're completely dependent on somebody else.
Well, we'll certainly talk in a few minutes later on tonight. We're going to look at fuel and possible alternatives. But let's focus more on that story and on the food crisis, because as you point out, we now realise just how dependent we were on Russia and Ukraine. So let's look at that story. The United Nations have warned that the war in Ukraine has helped to stoke a global food crisis which could last for years if it goes unchecked. The World Bank announced an additional $12 billion in funding to mitigate the devastating effects of the war. Again, as I said, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that shortages of grain and fertilizer caused by the war, warming temperatures and the pandemic have all driven supply problems to, as he said, tip tens of millions of people over the edge into food insecurity, as financial markets saw share prices fall heavily again on fears of inflation and worldwide recession. The Secretary General was speaking at a UN meeting in New York on global food security, and he said that what could follow would be malnutrition, mass hunger and famine in a crisis which could last for years, as he and others urged Russia to release the Ukrainian grain exports. He said that he was in intense contact with Russia and other countries to try to find a solution. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and international economic sanctions on Russia have disrupted supplies of fertilizer, wheat and other commodities from both countries, pushing up prices for food and fuel, especially in developing nations. Together, the warring nations produce 30% of the world's wheat. Before the invasion in February, Ukraine was seen as the world's breadbasket, exporting 4.5 million tonnes of agricultural produce per month through its ports, and that's 12% of the planet's wheat and 15% of its corn and half of the planet's sunflower oil. But with ports like Odessa and Krasnoyarsk and others cut off from the world by Russian warships, the supply can travel only on congested land routes, which are far less efficient. As a result, prices have skyrocketed. The UN's Food and Agricultural Price Index reached an all-time high of almost 160 points in March before falling about 1% in April. Cereal and meat price indices have also hit record highs in March, and wheat has almost doubled its price since last year. So those are the stark figures now. I don't think I'm alone, Anne, in not being aware before this February just how much of those vital commodities came from Russia and Ukraine. But the point is that they're staying there because there's a military blockade. So the Russians will not let that grain out of the Black Sea. So that's what I meant by saying the West is using sanctions against Russia and Russia's threatening food sanctions against everybody. That's what's going on, isn't it?
Yeah, it's powerful, let's say powerful politicians, primarily powerful men, playing these awful macho games, and who's suffering? Ordinary people with no power. And I'm terrified for what's going to happen here in Scotland and in the rest of the UK. But, you know, what's going to happen here is nothing compared to what is happening and is going to happen in the developing countries. That obviously doesn't mean that we should not be frightened for what's going to happen to people here. We never thought that we would be in the position that we're going to be in, or I hope we're not going to be in it, because I hope the Tory government are going to realise that they just cannot allow this to happen to people, and they do have the power to stop it. They don't have the power to stop the global crisis. They have an impact and an influence on that, but they can do things to help people, just to, you know, and in the same way that they threw money and solutions at people during the pandemic, and rightly, they just need to do that now. They've got to do it, because it's that, or you allow people to suffer and other people to die when there was never any need for it.
Yes, in this country, yeah, indeed, as you say, people who are comfortably off might pay a bit more for the pasta, but will survive. But people in poor countries, that could ruin them, of course. So yeah, we'll come
Although
on.
just to come in there, Hugh, I would say that there are plenty of people in this country who are, I mean, we keep saying it, choosing between heating and eating.
Mhm.
That's literally what they're going to be doing this winter. It's literally what some of them are doing. So people like myself, yes, will grumble about paying a little bit extra for, I think you said pasta, but there are so many people that it's an absolutely desperate
Yeah.
situation for them. And when people feel desperate, they give up. And I don't know what we're going to do to support. Well, I know what I'm going to do to support people, but I don't know what we're going to do. What the legacy from this is going to be. The legacy from the pandemic is dreadful. We're not coping with that yet properly, and now there's going to be a legacy from this for those people who survive it.
Yeah, the issue I don't have time to go into tonight is what is Chancellor Sunak doing about it. According to one economist today, whom I read, Sunak said yesterday that he has a plan, but he didn't say what it was. Now let's move on to one of the
He's
areas.
doing zero. That's
Yeah,
all the time you need. He's doing zero.
I know.
Sorry.
Well, the government does have, as you say, the government does have levers it can pull, and I'm sure somebody has told Chancellor Sunak where they are, but he's not pulling them. And that's another subject we really have to dedicate a programme to that. But one thing the Scottish Government can do now is to take decisions on those areas of social security which have been devolved to Holyrood. Now, there's a report on that today published by Audit Scotland, which has highlighted the Scottish Government's significant achievements, as they put it, in the scale and pace of delivering the devolved, excuse me, I've just lost my place, including those policies which have been devolved to the Scottish Government. As Nicola Sturgeon has pointed out several times, there's been a 6% increase in the social security measures which Holyrood is responsible for. I did not say Hollywood there. Now, she's, excuse me, I'm just trying to find my place because I've just jumped. We're using a technology here. Maybe I should just.
I'm happy to come in already right now.
Go ahead, please.
Well, can I just say that it's one of the things that makes me most proud to be a member of the SNP, and that is Social Security Scotland. And it's not because of the 12 new, I don't like using the word benefits, social security payments. It's not because of them. 7 of them, incidentally, are unique to Scotland. It's not just because of that. It's primarily because of the fundamental attitude from Social Security Scotland, the culture change within that organisation. Well, it's a new organisation, but obviously people have come from other organisations, primarily the DWP. But the cultural shift that says people who are claiming social security payments are entitled. These are their rights and they should be claiming them. We want them to claim them because we all need a little bit of help from time to time. And there's no blame game going on here, and it's treating people with dignity. And I think it's just an incredible thing. And I was talking to Ben McPherson, the minister responsible for this now, the other day, and I was asking him, how do you ensure that the compassion that we start off with is still there? And he said, because it's being closely monitored, because it's so important to the Scottish Government that we treat people with dignity and compassion. That's one of the things that makes me so proud to be a member of the SNP.
Yes, and on that, let's note what the rest of the report said. So this is the report from Audit Scotland, really saying how's it going so far as the Scottish Government has taken over several of these benefits or entitlements, as you say, Anne. And the Audit Scotland report further notes that the work has continued despite the challenges caused by the COVID pandemic. And the report acknowledges that the Scottish Government has continued to successfully deliver existing social security benefits and introduce complex new ones, including the Scottish Child Payment, the Child Disability Payment, and the Adult Disability Payment. These have all been set up and delivered in challenging circumstances. The report also recognises the importance of social security in Scotland's national mission to tackle child poverty, to mitigate the cost of living crisis, and to address inequalities. In line with the Scottish Fiscal Commission's forecast, the Scottish Government has committed over £3.9 billion of benefit expenditure over 22 to 23, providing support to more than 1 million people. This is over £360 million above the level of funding to be received from the UK Government through the block grant adjustments. The Audit Commission also points out that benefit spending in Scotland is also forecast to be £760 million higher by year 26-27 than the related sum received in the block grant from the UK government. And again, Ben McPherson, who you talked about a minute ago, Anne says, I'm pleased that this Audit Scotland report recognises the significant progress we've made in building a new public service from scratch since 2018. As you said, Anne, delivering 12 new benefits, and 7 of these are completely new forms of financial support which are not available anywhere else in the UK. Okay, that's what the Scottish Government can do with some devolution. I wonder what it could do if it had control of more of the levers of government, Anne.
Yep.
Well, okay,
yep.
we'll just take it. Go ahead.
I know, I was just going to say, I can't remember what year you were saying. I think you were saying we would need 700 and something million more by 2026. And Audit Scotland will be basing that on us staying as we are, i.e. part of the union. They'll be basing it on us waiting for money to be taken from us and then given back in block grants. But by then, I'm very confident we will have voted yes in a referendum next year. And if we have, I don't say independence. I've never said independence is a panacea, but it gives us the tools, the toolkit to be able to make significant changes. And it's about changing things around childcare and other things that you know, childcare, for instance, enables people to go out and work, and so it reduces the requirement for social security payments. So who knows what that figure actually would be? And I know Audit Scotland's not going to do a report based on what might happen after independence, but you know, it's really worth thinking about. It's worth us thinking about it.
Yes, of course, the Scottish Government is committed to holding an independence referendum, and practically that means by the end of 23. We have, of course, we don't have a date. As soon as we have that, I'm sure maybe Anne will let us know. Right, let's move on to the next story, and this is one we've covered before. Oh God, I'm fed up. I hope I don't have to cover this anymore, Anne. Boris Johnson will not be receiving any more fines for lockdown breaching parties. It has been confirmed after the Met Police said they had completed their investigation into gatherings in Downing Street and Whitehall. The police force said they had issued a total of 126 fixed penalty notices covering 12 of the events. They investigated 12 events. Johnson and his wife Carrie both received fixed penalty notices last month for attending a celebration for his birthday, but will not be fined again. The Met has confirmed they're taking no further action as regards the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson's official spokesperson has said. It's understood a similar reassurance was given to Carrie Johnson. The Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, who had not been fined before now, is not among this latest tranche of penalties, officials said. While Mr Johnson received just one fine would seemingly limit the prospect of moves by Tory MPs to oust him, he now faces the publication of the full report into illicit gatherings by the senior civil servant Sue Gray, which officials say will be published next week. A brief interim version of the Gray report was published, but the full details were delayed for police investigation. That's now completed. Gray has had access to significant amounts of information, including photographs. However, it seems unlikely that the release of these in the report will be authorised. The Met said it has imposed fines for events on 8 dates. However, on several of these, more than one event took place. The Met says that one of the 12 events referred to in the investigation all resulted or will result in fixed penalty notices being issued. The 126 fines were issued to 83 different people, the Met said. There were 53 issued to men and 73 to women. That was 35 men and 48 women altogether, meaning 28 people received either 2 or more penalties. The Met's acting Deputy Commissioner Helen Ball said that 97 fines have so far been paid, and none of those was outstanding beyond the 28-day period which people have to make the payment. She said the breach of the rules that led to each of these fines being issued was clear-cut. Now, forgive my weariness at the start of this piece, Anne, but I get the distinct impression now that we've all been played along for the whole of this year. We've been saying, will he resign? Will the Tories force him out? Well, no, he's not going, is he? So has this all been a massive publicity waste of time, a massive diversion by Number 10?
I don't think so. I mean, well, I mean, that The diversion, you mean the kind of delaying tactics? Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think what he was hoping was that he wouldn't get any fines, and then he could say, "Oh, there you go, I didn't get any fines," regardless of the fact that he was photographed there. But he did get a fine. So I think they thought, well, we'll just delay it even further. We'll get the Met Police, and the Met Police were extremely obliging to wait even longer before they reveal how many fines they've issued. We'll get the Met Police to not do it over the course of the council elections. And as I say, they were extremely obliging. But it delays it further and further. So you've moved on. People have moved on. And by the time this news comes out, I think Boris is thinking, oh, well, it was only the one fine, because we've all been waiting for weeks to see how many fines he would get. We already knew about that one. Oh, it was only the one fine, move on. No Prime Minister, no serving Prime Minister has ever been fined before for breaking the law while in office. So, it's as shocking as it was. But you're right, if it goes on for so long, people just get really fed up with it. Although I have to say, when I was campaigning during the council elections, it was mentioned. Practically every person I spoke to mentioned it. And what it's about is trust. And they know that they can't trust him anymore. But it's not just him. It's everyone that protected him. And I think sometimes all that does is make people lose faith in politicians in general. But there'll be more. There'll be more of the. He'll do more things, But I think he is really quite callous, and he doesn't care. He's not worried. And he's quite Trumpian in his approach.
Yes, so brass necking it up to now has served him well. So presumably there shouldn't be any delay to the full publication of the Sue Gray report, so no doubt we'll talk about that when it comes out. Now, on to a domestic story. Now, Drugs Policy Minister Angela Constance has been in London today for a visit which will include attendance at the UK government's National Drugs Summit and also included meetings with the UK Minister for Policing, Kit Malthouse, and other key stakeholders. Following the meeting, Drugs Policy Minister Angela Constance said, "At my meeting with the Minister, I outlined the vast amount of work being done on Scotland's national mission, backed by £250 million over the course of this Parliament. And this includes expanding residential rehab services, a new medication-assisted treatment, the MAT, service standards, and increasing the number of people in treatment and recovery in every area in Scotland. The forthcoming applications by health boards for drugs checking facilities in Dundee, Aberdeen and Glasgow were also discussed. We are hopeful that the Home Office will look favourably on these, as they will enable people who use drugs to ensure that what they are taking is safe, and will also mean services on the ground can react more swiftly to any emerging trends in terms of drugs use." Angela Constance went on to say, "I reiterated that in Scotland we continue to take a public health and evidence-led approach, and stressed that while the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 is reserved to the UK government, we are continuing to work with partners including the GHSCP, that's the Glasgow Health and Social Care Committee, and the COPFS, that's the Crown and Procurator Fiscal Service, and Police Scotland, to examine how a safer drugs consumption facility could operate and be policed within the existing legal framework. The reality is, Scotland is in the midst of a public health emergency, and that needs a public health response. And we call again on the UK government to either reform the Misuse of Drugs Act or devolve it." So the odd thing here, it seems to me, Anne, is that while Angela Constance is talking about working with the health and social care authorities, she has to talk to the policing minister in the UK government. Is she talking to the wrong guy?
Talking to the wrong guy, talking to any of the Conservative ministers, if you ask me, because but she's talking to the correct person, if you like. So they are absolutely against this being a public health issue. And that's just utter madness. I mean, what is addiction if it's not a health condition? And, Angela has come into this role, and she's gained the respect of many in the sector who were extremely worried about the increasing numbers of people dying, as I was, and she's really listened and worked with them, and she's doing everything she can But she's doing it with one hand tied behind her back. And we're not saying the solution is safe consumption rooms. We're saying that's a big part of the solution. And the ridiculous thing is that our Scotland's drugs minister is not allowed to do it. She's not allowed to do what she thinks is the solution, will help to reduce drugs deaths. I mean, what other country in the world, has to just sit on its hands and wait for them to catch up, which no doubt they will do one day and maybe in the next century. But, so yeah, it's really, really difficult. And myself and Alison Thewlis and Stuart MacDonald and Ronnie Cowan and others have been calling for this for a long time, but it's all falling on deaf ears.
Yes, so of course, treating other issues as a health problem rather than as a police problem has produced results. And in fact, I read last week that the number of deaths from drugs has begun to fall in Scotland. It's not fallen by a huge amount, but the good news is it has peaked and it is going down. So we've got the beginning, haven't we, of that health approach, even although the full drugs policy is not devolved. But do you think, is the Scottish Government, do you think, able to push, particularly through the Procurator Fiscal Service, able to push more of a hands-off approach in Scotland, even if Kit Malthouse doesn't like it?
Yeah, I mean, there is a possibility that, the police could agree to, and Procurator Fiscal Service could agree to the worry is that if we have safe consumption rooms without permission from Britain, and you can tell it sticks in my throat saying that, if we have safe consumption rooms, that the people who work in them and the people who use them could be criminalised. So the police could arrest them, they could be charged. So it's about, and I think work is going on to convince, I think it's the Lord Advocate that has to decide this, to convince them to have a hands-off approach. It would be just a lot easier if Kit Malthouse would just say, yes, okay, I respect your government's right to do what it believes to be the right thing. And it would be a million times easier if we were just independent and just made our own decisions about all of it, like any other country in the world does.
Well, let's move on to another issue, which is also not devolved, but still happens inside Scotland. We're talking about a cramped and unsafe mother and baby unit for asylum seekers. It has finally been closed down. This is the Glasgow Southside facility, which was operated by the Mears Group on contract to the Home Office to accommodate mothers and babies who are seeking asylum. A report by the Office of the Children's Commissioner published in March found that the women and their children were living in conditions that posed a significant risk of violating their human rights. Despite the assurances from the Mears Group in November 2021 that families would be moved, there were still 12 mums and their babies in the unit at the end of March. It's now been confirmed that they've all been relocated to more suitable housing and that the unit has now been closed. As well as advising that the mothers and babies were moved, the Commissioner's report also recommended that COSLA and partners should amend procedures to ensure the human rights duties of the statutory agencies. Also, the Scottish Government should legislate to create human rights-based statutory minimum housing standards for children. Glasgow City Council, the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and the HSCP should commit to not approving any asylum accommodation for children if it violates their human rights. Well, that seems a bit obvious, doesn't it, Anne? But again, the thing is, the Scottish Government doesn't have any legal authorities to intervene because it's administered by the Home Office in London.
Yeah. And, as the SNP's immigration spokesperson in Westminster, this is something that I could give you so many other examples as well, but the mother and baby unit, the work that the Children's Commissioner has done is fantastic. It's really spot on. And I want to actually pay tribute to a grassroots organisation called More Migrants Organising for Racial Equality, and run by my friend Yvonne, who, these are all people who've been through the system, and so they're coming at it from a different perspective. And the reason that they knew what was happening at the mother and baby unit is because they were there every day supporting the mothers. And you said that last November, Mears committed to emptying it. Well, last March, they committed to me, I was having regular meetings with them, and they committed to me to not taking any more and to gradually moving people out, and they were actually taking more people in. And it was horrendous because they're in tiny little rooms, and when the babies start to crawl, there is nowhere to crawl to. And they've got cookers in the rooms, you know, the cooker is next to the cot. So some of the mothers were saying to me, and I met them several times, some of them were saying to me, I'm scared to cook in there because, you know, and I'm scared to let the baby sleep in the cot because they're next to a cooker. And I want to take the baby into the bed with me, but it's a tiny little bed, so I can't even do that. It was just, you know, it was awful. It was awful.
Yeah, horrible. So at least that's some progress there anyway. Now I'm going to move on to a story about energy. I think this relates back to the story we discussed at the top of the news, which is that the Russians, of course, are using food and gas and oil as part of their counter sanctions, if you like. So why don't we just produce our own energy, Anne? So I wonder what you think of hydrogen. Some people describe hydrogen as the miracle fuel of the future. So what we hear today at UK government level is that countries at the cutting edge of hydrogen innovation will receive up to £60 million of UK government funding towards the development of hydrogen as affordable and clean energy source. The funding has been awarded to 28 projects across the UK, including Scotland, Wales and the north of England, and working across a range of different sectors and technologies through the low carbon and supply to competition. That's a high supply to, they call it. This will support research and innovation in both the production and the transporting of hydrogen, making it more viable, making it an affordable fuel for powering industry. And that might be particularly useful for energy intensive sectors which rely on expensive fossil fuels. It will also drive the UK hydrogen industry forward, reducing costs, bringing new solutions to the market and ensuring that the UK continues to develop world-leading hydrogen technologies here at home. I'm quoting Anne from the UK government's press release. This competition is part of the Net Zero Innovation Portfolio, which is a fund to accelerate the commercialisation of low-carbon technologies, systems and business models. Now, there are two streams in the hydrogen competition. Funding for Stream 1 winning companies is split into two phases. Stream 1, Phase 1, supports the development of feasibility studies to test how ready the technologies are, with companies receiving up to £300,000 per project. And Phase 2 of Stream 1 will later select projects from the Phase 1 group and support the demonstration of the new technology with up to £6 million per project. Funding for Stream 2 has already been awarded through this initial allocation. The competition will support 28 projects, and 23 of these are at an earlier stage, and 5 projects seem to be in a more advanced stage, bringing their ideas closer to the marketplace. So the Stream 1 feasibility support funding goes to 21 lead organisations across the UK, and that includes several innovators in Scotland, as well as others in Wales, Northern Ireland and the English regions. Okay, so I don't know if you've been reading a lot about hydrogen or if you're involved in that in your Westminster work, but this, the hydrogen economy maybe is a mirage in front of us of cheap and clean energy, but I'm old enough to remember when nuclear was cheap and clean and free energy, and that didn't turn out so good. But hydrogen looked like a winner to me, doesn't it? You burn hydrogen and what do you get? You get water. It doesn't make any pollution at all. So are we going to go hydrogen?
Well, I mean, it seems to make sense, but I'm kind of like you. I'm like, right, well, let's press ahead with this and then just keep an open mind about it. But, you know, we're so fortunate in Scotland in that not only did we have the oil at a time when we thought oil was safe to use, I mean, safe in terms of the impact on the world, on the environment. But we've got a plethora of natural resources, and you know, we're so fortunate in that respect. What we're not fortunate in is that we've kind of been dependent on decisions of the UK government. I mean, even the wording, I mean, I think it's good that this is happening, but even the wording of that is a competition. You can win something in the competition. You know, we should be just putting our heads together and putting our resources together and making sure that we get it right. And I think that, I'm not saying that this is not a good thing. I'm just saying that I think we would have done it because we've been on board with clean energy for a long, long time. But I think we would have done it by now had we had the ability to do it. And the ability comes from being able to make those decisions, being able to make those investments. And by that, I do not mean that we could only afford it through the UK. What I mean is our money goes down there and then they decide what we're spending it on. So yeah, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, I hope. I'm feeling quite hopeful about it. But let's just see what happens. And I wish more had been done years ago.
Yes, if hydrogen is in fact the fuel of the future, that's an if, because it seems, as you can see from this competition, I know you don't like that, but they don't really know what technology to go for. There is a Scottish hydrogen strategy and a UK-wide hydrogen strategy, which we've looked at, and it's really all about testing the water, as it were, because if you look through it, I'm not going to go through all of the companies involved, but they've all got different approaches, different technologies, different clever ideas which might work, might not work. So they're really very much at the testing stage. And it's just a pity we hadn't done this years ago. But of course, the Scottish Government could have done it. And the Scottish Government could now be building that Acorn project for carbon capture, which also produces hydrogen. But of course, the Acorn project was cancelled, not by Scotland, but by the UK government. So again, the Scottish Government could do more of this if they had the power to do so. I don't
There's a theme running through this programme tonight.
Yep. Okay. Now let's just finally, before we move on to the next story, also we just heard tonight, Anne, you won't know this because we just got this press release about an hour ago from the Scottish Government, but the First Minister's also been talking about a low carbon manufacturing challenge fund, because this links into that really, because the Scottish Government is giving money to manufacturing businesses who are looking for ways to continue manufacturing but not by producing as much carbon as before. So the First Minister was today talking to the Federation of Small Businesses, and she says that 92% of Scotland's innovative manufacturers are small businesses, and manufacturing, she says, is vital to our economy. Now, it's vital therefore to decarbonise the small manufacturing sector, which provides jobs for the future and also helps us to meet our net zero ambitions by the target year. So the Scottish Government today has announced this low carbon manufacturing fund worth £3 million, and it encourages innovation in technologies. So the small firms are being given a help here to say, if you can find another way of doing that that uses less or produces less carbon waste, then do it. In fact, let me give you one example. This has just come in today. I was amazed to hear this. The funding has already produced a vehicle called Emergency One, which is a firefighting truck based in Cumnock, made in Cumnock. It's the world's first fully electric fire engine, and it's just been bought by the French Fire Service. So there you are. So that's the sort of thing you can do. You can still make useful stuff, but you don't need to produce so much pollution and carbon. So vive la France.
I'm taking a mental note to let the businesses in my constituency know about this. And I think it's great as long as they don't use the word competition. They're calling it a fund.
It's an award, like yes. That you're right, that competition doesn't appear on the press release. Okay, so can we go low carbon? Do we have the technologies? So some government support and some innovation from industry. Right, let's press on now because I don't want to keep you. So we're going to look at another story which was reported on a few days ago. Israel will not launch a criminal investigation into the killing of the US Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was which Palestinian officials and witnesses have blamed her killing on Israeli soldiers. According to a report in the Haaretz newspaper, the Israeli Defense Forces military police branch has accepted the assurances of Israeli troops that they were not aware she was in a village adjacent to the Jenin refugee camp when she was killed on the 11th of May. The Biden administration and the UN Security Council have called for a transparent investigation. Abu Akleh was a household name across the Arab world, known for documenting the hardship of Palestinian life under Israeli rule for Al Jazeera television. Her killing received widespread international coverage and prompted criticism from the White House. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken promised her family that Washington would demand that her death be properly investigated. Abu Akleh was killed during an arrest raid by an Israeli command unit on Palestinian militants. According to Haaretz, the head of the Commando Brigade, Colonel Meni Liberty, identified 6 occasions during the raid when Israeli soldiers opened fire, allegedly at armed Palestinians who were near Abu Akleh and other journalists. The Israeli military had previously released an account that said it could not unequivocally determine the source of the bullet that killed Abu Akleh. The account speculated that the bullet could have been fired by either a Palestinian militant or an Israeli soldier using a telescopic scope at 200 meters. Palestinian officials have refused to give the recovered bullet to Israeli authorities to analyse, but said it welcomes international investigations. The decision by the Israeli Military Advocate General, Major General Tifat Tomer Yerushalmi, not to order the investigation by the military police Criminal Investigation Division marks a departure from the majority of recent incidents involving the IDF shootings of civilians in the West Bank, which had been usually followed by investigations. At the funeral last Friday, police beat mourners carrying her casket, prompting more criticism of Israeli authorities. Last week, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, complained about a lack of Israeli accountability for deaths in the occupied territories. So there's been widespread criticism of the Israeli authorities. Now, of course, we cannot say who fired that bullet, and of course it's understandable that the Palestinian authorities don't want to hand it over to the other side. What do you think should be the correct way of investigating this sad death?
Well, I mean, there's one way to find out, and the way to find out is not to say there will be no criminal investigation. I mean, the whole point of a criminal investigation is to establish whether criminality took place or not. And if it didn't, fine. But you don't know that until you do the detailed investigation. And I think this just really, it was so sad when she lost her life. After everything she's done, she's been so courageous. As I've got to say, you know, people criticise journalists, but, you know, some journalists take incredible risks. And she did so to highlight something she felt very strongly about. And it was awful when she lost her life. But then to see those scenes when they were, you know, beating the mourners just added insult to injury. This I would have thought was their opportunity to, you know, to not make up for it, sorry, that's the wrong term, to you know, say, okay, we are taking this seriously. And I think it's the least they could do. It's just awful. I've not seen anything quite as shocking as that funeral procession and what happened there.
Yes, war correspondents, obviously by the very nature of their job, are likely to be in the firing line. But it was pointed out at the time that she was clearly wearing the protection gear, and she clearly had the big press, big letters. So it's definitely an occasion that requires investigation. But we know other journalists have sadly been killed. But yes, as you say, and yet there might well be a legitimate reason in those situations where somebody's going to be exposed to danger, but why not investigate it properly? We're going to move on to another Scottish story now, which is new guidance on school uniforms. Pupils, parents and carers are being asked to give their views on school uniform to help shape new national guidance. A key aim of the guidance will be to reduce costs for families while ensuring pupils can go to school feeling comfortable and ready to learn. A consultation to inform the national guidance is launched today, with a wide range of views being sought, including from schools, families, education authorities and suppliers. There will also be engagement with young people to seek their views. Education Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville said, "School uniform can promote a sense of identity, belonging and connectedness to school. However, the cost can be a significant burden for families, although there is no legal requirement to wear uniform. We have increased the school clothing grant to help families who need it most. Now we intend to go further by bringing forward national guidance aimed at reducing uniform costs." I think there's probably two sides to the school uniform costs. You could say that on the one hand, it's the same for everybody, you know, it's literally uniform, right? So So a rich family isn't going to spend 10 times as much on their uniform as a poor family. They're not going to get a Gucci made one or something like that. So it's supposed to be a great leveler, isn't it? But on the other hand, of course, if you've got a large number of children, it's going to be pretty expensive, right? So do you think we should have children in school uniform?
I mean, what you just said there, I mean, you have to think about, everybody pays the same price for their school uniform, but what proportion of your income is that price? And that's part of the problem. I mean, so when I was at school, which was only a few years ago, Hugh, as you know, when I was at school, there was a thing we had called Go As You Please Day. So you paid, oh, I'm going to embarrass myself now, you paid 5 pence. And you got to go on a particular Friday in the year and just wear whatever you liked. So you didn't have to wear your school uniform. I actually thought that was horrendous for some people. There was one girl in particular that I remember. She wasn't the only one it happened to, but her clothes were old. They were old-fashioned. They had rips in them. And people were merciless. They were merciless in, teasing her. And she was much better, much more comfortable hiding in the school uniform that was just the same as everybody else's. But it is, it's really, really expensive. And I know one of the things they're looking at in this consultation, and they're consulting the young people themselves as well, is comfort as well. So maybe one of the things they'll look at is, why is it that girls in a lot of schools are not allowed to wear trousers? They've got to wear a skirt. So the things like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether you should or you shouldn't. It is a leveler in some ways. And there's loads of great projects, and there's a couple in my constituency where people, and it's not just about being poor and not being able to afford your school uniform, it's about the environment and not wasting perfectly good blazers and other parts of the school uniform. So there's a number of organisations have sprung up, and basically all they do is just recycle uniforms for free. But yeah, I suppose there's loads of different ways that you could look at it, isn't there?
Yeah, but of course, that's the big thing about having a uniform, as I said earlier on. It's a sort of a leveler, right? And I appreciate what you say about the proportion of your income you spend on it is the key thing, of course. But at least if the uniform doesn't change very much from year to year, then you can recycle, you can have hand-me-downs, and it's not going to be immediately obvious that you've got an old one, as long as it wasn't too much damaged by the previous occupant. Now, just before we finish our final story tonight, something else we just got today. I meant to mention this earlier on when we were talking about talking about really the split on powers between Holyrood and Westminster, because there was a Holyrood committee today addressed by Alan Page, who's an emeritus professor of public law at Dundee University, and he talked about the basically the Sewell Convention, which maybe you could fill us in on in a minute. But he said that he's using the metaphor of an earthquake when the ground becomes kind of liquid underneath your feet, so I'm told. And he says that the ground under devolution has begun to turn liquid, he says. Back in the Scotland Act 2016, the professor said it was inconceivable that the UK Parliament would legislate without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. So basically what's supposed to happen is the Sewell Convention, isn't it? So would you like to fill us in on that, please, Anne?
So basically, there's certain things that they have to seek the consent of the Scottish Parliament for. I'll give you one example. So next week, we've got the Public Order Bill coming before us. The Public Order Bill is basically just a rehash of the bits of the policing bill that's now become an act. The Lords, the House of Lords, can you believe it? The radical House of Lords got rid of certain parts of it, and now they're bringing it forward in the Public Order Bill. They're just rehashing it. And one of the things that they've added to this rehash is, I can't remember what it's called, it's like serious disruption orders. So say you want to go and campaign against nuclear weapons, and the obvious place to campaign against nuclear weapons, apart from Faslane, but you want to campaign against those who are spending the money on the nuclear weapons. So you want to go to the seat of power, which is Westminster, because the Scottish Government has no say in this. So you go to Westminster and you come under this legislation, and they decide that you have caused serious disruption and you don't have to do much to cause serious disruption. And you get one of these orders against you, and it means that you have to report into, this is a very long explanation, isn't it? You have to report into your local police station. That's one of the things they can make you do, report regularly to your local police station. Well, you know, that means that Police Scotland has to manage that, but the Scottish Government has not agreed to that. So they seek a legislative consent motion. The Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, decides whether or not they agree with that or they consent to that law that has an impact on what happens in Scotland, and on things that come under Scottish legislation. So that's basically it. But yeah, they're right. He's right. You know, increasingly they just don't care. They just plough ahead anyway. You know,
Yeah, that's
but
right.
I think partly I content myself with the belief that they're ploughing ahead anyway, and they're not even trying to maintain good relations or respectful relations because they know we're going. They know that they can't hang on to Scotland for much longer. So I always like to content myself with that theory.
Okay, so yeah, how much longer? So again, Fiona Hislop pointed out that the Scottish Government has for some time been using the phrase power grab. So particularly since Brexit, the UK government really wants to just harmonise, to use European expression. Same rules apply to Scotland as apply to England. Therefore, why do you need a Scottish government? Anyway, we better move on now, but that's a very quick summary of the Sewell Commission. So legislative consent no longer required. Eh? Now, our final story tonight, a dedicated fund to repay mesh removal costs will open for applications on the 6th of June. Transvaginal mesh removal reimbursement scheme will enable women who have paid for surgery to claim their money back. To be eligible, arrangements for treatment must be made by the 3rd of June. Let's just go over those dates yet. So the 6th of June is when they open for applications, but it has to be for procedures which have already been agreed before that date, by the 3rd of June. After this date, patients wishing treatment funded by the NHS will be seen through the complex pelvic mesh removal service in the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Any woman who expresses a preference to be treated outside of Scotland will be able to request a referral to one of the NHS England specialist centres. Progress in making arrangements for future mesh removal surgery to take place in independent hospitals where women wish continues. An agreement is in place for Spire Healthcare in Bristol to accept referrals, and positive discussions continue with the Dr. Veronikis, who's in Missouri, the United States. The Scottish Government has also announced today that projects to improve the care and support available for people... Sorry, let me just pause there. That's a different story. Right, so obviously this is a very sad case. Of course, the mesh implants went seriously wrong for large numbers of women. So I don't happen to know where the centres of excellence are. Do you know, Anne, is it likely that people would get more expert care in those centres that have been mentioned?
Yes, so I have constituents who have been fighting for something to happen for a number of years. I mean, there have been complications. There was an expert medic in the States who the Scottish Government were going to pay for him to come over and carry out these operations because there's not many people can do it. In the end, he didn't come. He decided I don't say he decided he didn't want to come, but for whatever reason, he didn't come, and it left them high and dry. And it's something that I know that when Jean Freeman was the Health Secretary, she was really keen to get sorted out. So this will be a continuation of her work, and I'm glad it's getting sorted. And I will be sure to publicise that because it's not a huge window of time. You know, if you have to have you have to have sorted out, you know, agreed the medical care by the 3rd of June. But I'm glad it's happening and it's being taken seriously because, you know, these women are in absolute agony. Almost all of one of them has told me all of the time. She said she gets no relief from her pain. I've got a knee injury at the moment and I'm on quite strong painkillers. And they don't always work. So sometimes I'm in quite significant pain. But it's sometimes, do you know, I can't imagine living in that pain. And the fact of how it happens is extremely galling for people. So I'm really pleased to see this is getting sorted, and I just hope all goes to plan.
Yeah, I hope so. So those dates are, let's just go over it again. The fund will open on the 6th of June for people who have already made arrangements for treatment by the 3rd of June. But after this date, other funding is available if you contact the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Now, the other half of this health story, which is really a separate story, so just move on to that now. Finally, the Scottish Government has also announced today that projects to improve the care and support available for people with long COVID are to benefit from an initial tranche of £3 million of Scottish Government funding, following a thorough planning process undertaken by health boards to determine the key priorities. The first allocations of the Long COVID Support Fund across 2022 will provide £3 million for boards to introduce a care coordinator role, extra resource to support a patient-centred assessment, including a multidisciplinary assessment service, and additional capacity for community rehab to support people with issues affecting their day-to-day quality of life. Now, Anne, I've heard people from the opposition parties in Scotland frequently say in the Scottish Parliament, what is the government doing about long COVID? Well, and the Scottish Government saying months ago, or the First Minister saying, we're planning it, we're on it, we're organising it. So they are doing that, aren't they? Do you have any constituents who have been coming to you saying they are experiencing various long COVID symptoms?
Yes, lots. I also have a family member who claims to have long COVID but has never had COVID. So I have pointed out that that's really an impossibility. But yeah, there was a lot of concern about, I mean, you can't rush these things. You can't just, the opposition say, get this sorted, and they want it sorted tomorrow. But, I do think, I'm glad it's being prioritised now. I think it's horrendous situation. I do know people with it. And when I had COVID, which was only a few months ago, for the 10 days that I had it, I was completely wiped out. And I was slightly worried that I was going to continue to be like that. But thank goodness I was fortunate. The idea, I know so many people continue to have lung problems, continue to be wiped out, huge impact on your life. So I'm really glad we're looking into it. Well,
yes, as you say, and yet you can't just rush into things, particularly, of course, with a new virus. This was they called it the novel coronavirus, didn't they, first of all? So, of course, the medical profession itself has to find out as they go along, like quite clearly, but we haven't got a lot of research into long COVID because it's not been around long enough to do that. So let's just see if there's anything else coming up now before we shut tonight. Okay, now, well, I'm just hearing another story's just come in from Glasgow that Rosa Sally, councillor, has been appointed Bailey to Glasgow City Council. Will be also here tonight at the Glasgow. And also the new Provost of Glasgow has been appointed today. So the administration, SNP and the Green Party are making progress. So I expect you were delighted to hear that Rosa Sally was elected to the Glasgow City Council.
Absolutely. It was. I even feel quite emotional talking about it now. I think she'll be incredible, but she sends out an incredible message to people who come here as asylum seekers seeking refuge, and it's not easy for them when you look at the likes of Mears and having to live in mother and baby units, but to know that you live in a country that one day would welcome you to represent other people in that country. It's brilliant. Can I just say, Glasgow City Council, SNP and Green Group, fantastic, bravo. I mean, most of the councillors in my constituency appear to be heading up departments now. So I'm particularly happy about that and give a big shout out to them. But really the deal between, or the agreement between the Greens and the SNP, the initial agreement, and I hope the long-term coalition, just bravo. You look at what Labour's doing and who they've, elected. They tried to have their leader elected today as leader of the council, and he was allegedly in an airport somewhere in Seville on the phone while the council meeting was going on. So I'm not surprised he didn't get anywhere with that.
Allegedly, yeah, taking the sun, was he? Now, also, just to underline the new administration in the city of Glasgow. Sorry if you're in other parts of Scotland, but we're just here today that the new Provost of Glasgow will be Councillor Jacqueline McLaren, who represents the north side of the city. Canal area, that north of Maryhill, I think. That's just round the corner from your constituency, isn't it? So
Oh,
that's
it's in my
Lord,
constituency.
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it's in my constituency. So Jackie
Oh, is
McLaren,
it?
I was just saying to her today, I remember 5 years ago, she wasn't sure whether to put herself forward. She wasn't sure whether she'd be good enough. She's been a fantastic councillor, and now she's Provost of the City of Glasgow, and she represents Canal along with her ward colleague Alan Gow. And Canal is Postle Park, Milton, Rockhill. So I'm absolutely so proud of her. I think she'll do us proud. I can't wait to see her in action.
Okay, so that's the news from I'm not sure if it's an actual coalition, but the agreement between the SNP and the Green councillors in the City of Glasgow. I don't know if it's a coalition or an understanding, but as you say, Labour has also been making understandings with various other groups throughout Scotland, but not the SNP. But look, listen, we're running a bit late tonight, Anne, so I better let you go and get your tea. So thanks for joining us, Anne McLaughlin. And yes, we've met before outside of the studio, so it's a pleasure to see you on the screen with us tonight, Anne. So
I didn't
thanks very
realise
much
it
for
was
joining
yourself,
us.
Hugh, because I couldn't see you at first.
Aye,
So
I
it's
see.
lovely to see you again.
Aye, me too. So we'll just draw us to a close now. So thanks to Anne for joining us on the programme, and of course a special thanks to you, and that includes of course our supporters who I imagine are watching us tonight, or maybe getting us on the catch up later. If you'd like to be one of our supporters, then please look at the donate button on our website, broadcastingscotland.scot. And it's only our supporters who keep us going, actually. It's the people who have signed up there, a wee direct debit monthly, who are actually keeping us on the air. So thanks for that. And if you know anyone else who would like to contribute to independent broadcasting in Scotland, then please point out that we really could do with your money. So thank you for supporting us, and thanks to everyone for watching us tonight. So we'll be back tomorrow with Scotland at 7 on Friday. This is Hugh Stewart and Anne McLaughlin. Thanks. Goodbye now.
Bye.